Hello, everyone, and thanks for watching. We are Republicans in France. Today, we have a very special guest, Mr. Kenneth Timmerman. It's a real honor to have him on today's videocast. He's got a long list of credentials, but I'll try to go down the list as quickly as I can. Mr. Timmerman is an investigative reporter, best-selling author, and former congressional candidate. He was also on the National Security and Foreign Policy Advisory Board of Trump for President. His latest book, The Election Heist, is a political thriller about the risk of our nation's electoral integrity. It's scheduled to come out in August of this year, just in time for the November elections. You can pre-order your copy now on Amazon by clicking on the link at the bottom of our video. Ken will also share his views about the ongoing riots in the US, what it's really all about. Is it possible that these riots were designed to cause civil unrest and chaos just before the 2020 election? So let's dive right in. Tell us about the election heist, Ken.
Well, thanks, Antoinette and Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be with Republicans in France. Having lived here for 18 years, from 1975 until 1993, I know how few you are, and we all need to support each other. We have a house down here in the south of France near Saint-Tropez, where we got, quote, stuck. A great place to be stuck, but when they call confinement voluntary, it gets on my wick a little bit. My newest book, and by the way, I write most of my books here in France. This is my writing dacha, so to speak. I call it the house that my uncle Jesse bought, because we bought the house after my book on Jesse Jackson, Shakedown, appeared in 2002, and it did quite well. Thank you, Jesse. The election heist is about the 2020 election. It takes place from roughly August of this year through the third week in November of 2020. So you go through the campaign, you go into the actual election night itself. There's a long chapter, a third of the book is the actual election night and the results of the election. There's a coming in state by state, and you don't know if Trump's going to win this one or that one. And it's the whole election night thing, and it's a lot of fun to read. And then, of course, the aftermath, because the election is not finished on election night. And guess which state is still up for grabs?
Oh, Florida.
Florida. Exactly. Florida. And so I am a new resident of Florida. We moved down there from Maryland, where I was the Republican nominee for Congress in 2018 against Chris Van Hollen. Now, it was the last chance to prevent him from becoming a United States Senator, and I failed, the party failed. So the book takes place in that election district, which I know something about. And the main character is the Republican nominee against a liberal Democrat establishment figure who you get inside of his head. And he's not a very nice person, and he really doesn't like campaigning, the Democrat. And he talks about going to these street fairs in August with the little kids in their water squirters and leaving little trails of pee down his trousers. He's a little prissy, the Democrat in the campaign, and he's
elitist.
Yes, elitist, and he's never had to campaign in his whole life. His wife comes from a wealthy Balmorian family. That's Maryland speak for Baltimore. And he never wants to say that. He whenever he talks about his wife, who is part of his campaign, he says, well, she's actually a labor union activist. When in fact she comes from one of the wealthiest families in Maryland, and
sounds familiar.
And has been supporting his campaign, not just from the family, but with special interests and everybody else. So it's a kind of fun book. Now, the reason I focus on this campaign, because for the first time ever, he has an opponent who is giving him trouble. He's 45 years old, he's wealthy, he's handsome, he's Hispanic, and he's a former TV personality The guy's got charisma just dripping off of his fingers. And he's a widower. So all the girls, you know, are going after him as well.
It's an interesting twist.
Yeah, and he's got a teenage son who is his computer whiz and does all the computer work for the campaign. And you'll see a lot of the book is about not computers technically per se, but about computer hacking and how you hack the elections. And to make the book, you know, just to summarize it in a sentence, it's about how the elections get hacked and how bit by bit a few, quote, detectives or self-appointed detectives begin to unravel that stories and track it down. And that's the kind of give and play in the plot throughout the book. Now, what you're going to find out, there's a lot of technical background, a lot of research I did, because I like to research books, not just pull them out of my rear end, so to speak, even though I point up here, right? There's a lot of research in the book, and a lot of very real defects in our electronic voting systems that I've discovered that have been, they're out there if you look for them on the internet. At the end of the book, I'll give you a couple of links to start looking at a place called Dark Web, for example. Anyhow, the voting systems are not secure. Even, you'll find out in the book, even our paper ballots are not secure because the paper ballots are counted, are tabulated by a scanner, which is run by software. As I explained in the book, in the little afterword to the book, one of my friends in an alphabet soup agency reminded me that anything, he said, that is run by software can be hacked, including the tabulators of our paper ballot system. So we think the ballots are secure. We're sitting there now, you know, filling out the little circles and then putting the ballot into a scanner. Those ballots are not counted. It is the software that counts the ballot images. And so it basically takes a picture of the ballot. So if the software has been hacked, it can flip the votes. And so that's what the book is all about. Now, what I also wanted to show in the book, and you see this in the various scenes, is that the Democrats will do anything to win this election. They're absolutely desperate to win the 2020 election. You see Trump derangement syndrome every day that you turn on your television. You can't avoid it. I've got scenes in the book, for instance, with Antifa rioting where? On Fifth Avenue in New York City. Well, guess what? That actually happened 10 days ago. I wrote the book and sent it to the publisher in November of last year. So I'd already, you know, these are things that I think, you know, if you've been working in politics for years, you can project forward and imagine what this 2020 election is going to be like. I don't have the coronavirus in there. I didn't want to complicate it too much, but I certainly have all of what I believe are the basic elements of the tools the Democrats will use to steal this election, because that is what they're going to try to do. That is absolutely what they're going to try to do.
And they've already begun. Wouldn't you agree?
They've all already begun. They know they can't win the election. They know they cannot win. Why do I say that? Because a recent poll this past week showed that 41% of African-American voters, likely voters, registered voters, likely voters, were going to vote Trump. Now, that's a no-win situation for the Democrats. They have always believed that Black Americans were a captive audience on the plantation, on the Democrat plantation. They have nowhere else to go. Trump has turned that on its head. He said, you know,
can you repeat that stat, Ken?
41% of African-American likely voters are going to vote for Donald Trump in November. Say they're going to vote for Donald Trump in November. That is a death knell.
I've never heard that. I love it, but I've never heard it.
That was just this past week. There was a poll out, and I believe it was a Quinnipiac poll. And the Democrats cannot win without 90%, 85% at worst of the African-American vote. They just can't. They consider them to be a captive audience, and people like Candace Owens and others are turning things around and showing, well, gee, just because my skin is a certain color doesn't mean I have to vote a certain way. And it doesn't mean I don't have a mind and can think for myself. Of course I can. Stop insulting us, Democrats.
Exactly.
Stop insulting it. So they know they cannot win. They know they cannot win. So what do? They've got to steal the election. And that is my plot line in the election heist. And I show you all the different ways that they're going to do it.
Well, if I can jump in, I have been lucky to have read some excerpts of your book, a sneak peek of some of the chapters, and I can tell the viewers that it's really a great book. It's easy to read, and just what you were talking about, as far as talking about the way you described the police confrontations with Antifa in New York City is exactly what's happening today. So it reads almost like a non-fictional book, even though it's a fictional story, but it's based on actual events that are happening today. It's really a political thriller, and it's very timely to today's events, to the fact that so many people are concerned with election integrity coming up. And so I wanted to ask you talked about machines and the risk of software, which of course is always going to be some risk in software. But what would you consider the largest area of concern? I mean, with this pushing by the Democrats of this mass absentee ballots, it seems like that is finally what they're looking at. Is there finally an opportunity where they don't need voter ID? I mean, they've been accusing us of voter suppression just for asking for some simple ID at voter when they vote. Now with massive absentee ballot under the guise of because of COVID is too dangerous to go to a voting booth. So what do you see, or do you see it as foreign intervention? Is that still a major? Is foreign intervention a major thing, or is domestic intervention more important?
It's domestic intervention for sure.
Yeah.
We now know that the Russia hoax was a hoax. The $100,000 of Facebook ads, most of which, by the way, were bought after the election.
Excellent point.
November of 2016 and December of 2016, they had zero impact whatsoever on the election. That was just a story cooked up out of the imagination of Christopher Steele, and I believe probably a bunch of other folks who used to work in the Clinton White House, such as Sid Blumenthal and his sidekick, Cody Shearer. I believe they actually wrote a prequel to the Steele dossier that they needed to whitewash, they needed to launder it. So they got the DNC to hire Christopher Steele to then launder their dossier on Donald Trump, which was made up whole cloth. But yeah, mail-in ballots are a big, big problem. And they're a problem because the only way that they can be verified is by comparing the signature on the outside envelope with the signature on record. And few supervisors of elections, we have about 10,000 counties across the United States, each one with a slight variation in its election system. So we don't have a single nationwide election system as some countries do. We have 10,000 separate election systems, different machines, different procedures, whatever. So very few counties have handwriting experts, graphologists, on their payroll.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
I live in a small county in Florida, Nassau County, which is just north of Jacksonville. It's if you spit across I-95, you'll be in Georgia and be paying state income tax. So we live on Amelia Island and don't pay state income tax, and are blessed to be able to vote in Florida as well. But our Nassau County Supervisor of Election, Vicki Cannon, had the foresight to hire a graphologist, precisely thinking about the problem of mail-in ballots and massive absentee balloting. But she's one of very few. Yeah, right. So there's 67 counties in Florida, and I'll be surprised if a half dozen have handwriting experts. So without a handwriting expert, it's the Democrat attorney says this, the Republican attorney says that, and you basically, it's like in a courtroom, you only get so many challenges. So what they do is they flood the system. They flood the system. And the Democrats even have a word for this. They call it ballot harvesting.
Right.
And they've already planned it. It's a well-known technique, which they're now going to expand all across the system. But ballot harvesting, before this push for nationwide mail-in balloting, meant that you'd have Democrat activists going into nursing homes, going into poor communities where
poor people who can't read anymore,
who can't read and don't vote, and basically say, "Oh, I've got your ballot here. Here's a $25 gift card."
Yeah, I'll fill it out for you.
I'll fill out your ballot.
Do anything. All you have to do is try to sign it.
That's right. And if you can't sign, just put an X on it, and we'll make sure that that's okay. And we know they did this, by the way, in 2008 with the Obama campaign. When I was working at Newsmax at the time as an investigative reporter, when that profession still had some honor to it. Today, it's completely lost. There's no such thing as investigative reporting left in the United States today. We have scribes, and we have independent people putting stuff out on the internet. Anyhow, in 2008, I did a deep dive into Obama's campaign finance records, and we found tens of millions of dollars contributed by an individual called Will, Good. And as we looked into who Will, Good was, we found that they were all $25 contributions, and none of them could be linked to any bank account or any address. And it was basically the gift cards. So they would hand out these gift cards and then refunnel them back into the campaign. And I believe this was a way that big donors, whether it was George Soros or somebody else, were able to give millions more to the campaign than they would have done otherwise.
Wow.
What a scandal.
Real. Yeah, but no scandal at all. Nothing to see here, Virginia.
What is the Democrats?
There's no such thing as voter fraud, right?
Well, what can we do about it? Is it just up to the local politicians to decide whether they go with massive absentee ballot and ballot harvesting? Is it for the Republican local candidates to fight back, or can Trump do anything?
Trump can do something, and Republicans in Congress can do something, because there is now a move by the Democrat majority in the House, and please let us remove that coupling of words from our lexicon on November 3rd. Democrat majority in the House. It's a horrible thing.
Oh, yeah, we hope so.
We saw how bad it was with the Ukraine impeachment hoax, which was another hoax. But the Democrats today have a pending bill that would mandate mail-in ballots across the United States. This is unconstitutional because the voting system is decentralized, it's defederalized. They can have standards, which you had in the 1994 Voting Rights Act we call it motor voter, but you can't actually tell them what systems to use. So first thing to do is to defeat that bill, and then the second thing has to be done at the state level. Make sure that states do not then adopt a statewide mail-in ballot system. Now, if California does it,
that was my next question. California, it's like, how do you challenge California as a Republican?
Well, here's a hat tip to my good friend Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch. They have an effort that's been underway for a couple of years now to clean the voter rolls. And why is that important? If you got Los Angeles County, for example, they found 1.5 million people on the voter rolls who are either dead or had actually moved out of the state or moved out of Los Angeles County, and they are in federal court getting Los Angeles County to clean those names from the voter rolls. Why? Because if they're still on the voter rolls and you have mail-in ballots, the county will just mail them ballots to those, and whoever receives the ballot on the other end can vote it. And then you go to the Democrat judge and the Republican judge as they dispute the signature on the envelope in the front of it. So it's a big problem. Judicial Watch has been doing very good work on this, as has another good friend, James O'Keefe at Project Veritas. Has infiltrated, with hidden cameras, some of the Democrat election operations. Pretty scandalous what he's found.
So thanks to Judicial Watch and Project Veritas, they are exposing this and showing examples, which then will provide the Republican congressmen and senators enough examples to vote it down. Basically, we're getting to a vote.
Well, that's what we're heading towards. Another friend of mine, Christian Adams, who runs a voting rights group in Virginia, has been cataloging examples of voter fraud. So when you can show massive numbers of cases of voter fraud, that helps to convince members of Congress who might be on the fence.
Well, I don't think anything would convince the Democrats because, like you said, they'll do anything to steal the election, and I think that's exactly what their plan is.
Well, let me just give you a comment on. I used to work in Congress. Okay, I worked in Congress in 1993 when I came back from France. I actually worked for a Democrat at the time, and I can remember how the Democrats would. Tom Lantos. I did national security and proliferation for him. We actually coined the term. Forgive us, rogue regime. I coined the term rogue regime to describe Iran, North Korea, Syria, Libya, right, and Cuba. But at the time, I can remember it was always the Democrats who say, well, we're going to find some independent Republicans to support us on this or that legislation. Now, fast forward to today, try to be a Republican in Congress to find some independent Democrats to support you on legislation. It is near nigh impossible, regardless of the cause.
Exactly. We have a few defectors on the Republican side, don't we? Romney, who else?
Well, Romney is noteworthy.
Yes. Alaska and Murkowski, is it?
Murkowski. Yeah.
And the other one who just said she wouldn't vote for Trump either. But it's always those three. Is she from Maine or? Anyway.
Susan Collins, right.
Susan Collins.
Right.
It's always the same three.
It used to be her and her, there was another female senator from Maine, and the two of them used to be called the Weird Sisters. The Weird Sisters from Maine.
It's kind of like they're baked in. Those three will never vote for. They'll always vote with the Democrats.
Right.
But that's all. It's all concerning. But I hope that the Republicans step up and do the right thing and block it with the help of your friends at Judicial Watch and Project Veritas. I love those two groups. But a lot of it is also just a censoring of right-wing viewpoints on social media, and that's where I see a lot of domestic intervention too. Would you agree?
This is a
they have such power.
Yes, this is a really big deal, Paul, and it's something I'm very concerned about. I had a discussion just 2 days ago with a friend of mine who's an attorney in California, filing suit on behalf of a conservative Black activist who's been censored by Facebook, and she's been circulating a memo that has gone up to the White House and led to the president's, or helped to influence the president's executive order about freedom of speech and, quote, fact-checking by Twitter and Facebook. Here's the way I see it. I think that you've got probably 95% of the people who work in big tech, Google, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, are liberal or more than liberal. And probably 98% of them absolutely despise Donald Trump, despise us deplorables, consider everything between Los Angeles and New York City as flyover country.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That whole big red map of America that votes Republican regularly. And they're saying to themselves, good Lord, look, Trump won 2016 because of us. He used Twitter and he used social media. We can never let that happen again.
Never again.
So they are trying, as we speak, to find ways of limiting the president's access to his Twitter account and other social media, because they know how good he is at it. And by the way, to all those Republicans who say, well, I wish Trump would just, kind of ditch the Twitter thing and stop the Twitter thing. Let me tell you, absolutely not. It's his nuclear weapon. Twitter,
yes,
at the hands of this president, is a nuclear weapon. The Democrats don't know how to deal with it. The media doesn't know how to deal with it. And I during the campaign, one of my jobs is on this Foreign Policy and National Security Advisory Board was to kind of explain Trump to the heathen at the Hill. So I write columns at the Hill to explain Trump and what he was doing. And one of the things that amused me the most to watch, and it never failed, was Trump would tweet something outrageous at 5:45 in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, and there would go all the media, and it would set the agenda for the entire next day, for the entire day. They couldn't get off it. They'd forget everything else he was doing.
Yeah, you could say he doesn't send tweets. He doesn't send tweets. He sends tweaks.
Yes, and he leads them by the nose.
He tweaks the media.
There was the
and they fall for it every time.
Yeah, the most famous example of this, there was a dead news day. Nothing was on the horizon, nothing seemed was going on. And Trump tweeted out, I could be walking, down Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody.
I remember that. Yeah.
And they said, oh my God, Trump wants to shoot people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so what did it do? It
explodes their tightly wound snowflake minds.
Yes, but it also gave Trump yet another day of free publicity on national media.
Yeah.
The guy's a master.
We've been the subject of some shadow banning on our Facebook page. Republicans in France had the highest engagement out of any Republican page outside of the US for a very long time. And suddenly, without warning, without any particular obvious reason, our engagement just dropped. Our post reach dropped. And I think we were doing too well. We're also aligned with some conservatives in Europe, and there's a lot of French people, British people on our page. And we've found ourselves the subject of, we're not as big as President Trump whatsoever, but at one point we were just like breaking all records for any Republican page. And all of a sudden, mysteriously, there's no way to find out how or why, but your post reaches and your engagement drops below a third of what you're usually getting.
Well, I've got, first of all, congratulations for having that reach. I think that's terrific.
Yeah, thank you.
But second, there is something you can do, and I can tell you a little bit more about that offline, but shadow banning is a big deal, and there are people in Congress who are looking at it because it is illegal. And Facebook and Twitter and the other media organizations are going to be liable in federal court for big damages if they get caught, if they continue to get caught, I should say.
All right.
Well, maybe we should move on, Antoinette.
Yeah, let's move on to go ahead. You start on the riots. You want to talk about
yeah. We'd love to talk about things so much longer, but we have to move on, Ken. You have such a background in foreign affairs. You've been embedded in hotspots around the world, throughout Europe, throughout the Middle East, and you've seen your fair share of uprisings. And so I'd love to get your opinion on the uprisings of what's going on in the United States. You quickly talked about Antifa, but do you see it as a grassroots, spontaneous, justified reaction to George Floyd's death and systemic racism in the United States? Or do you see it as something else that's taken on a new identity of its own that's more well-funded and coordinated by political operatives?
Well, I'm going to surprise you and tell you, I think a bit of both. And I'll tell you why, a bit of both. It is a grassroots movement in the sense that it's huge, it's very widespread, you see it all across the country. But who does grassroots movements? Well, the Democrat Party does grassroots movements, right? They have ginned up all of their supporters. This is being run by the Democrats. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There is no systemic racism in the United States. It's an absurd thing on the face of it. We are the only country on the planet that fought a war to end slavery. We are the only country on the planet where the African American community has gone from the high levels of unemployment and poverty and lack of opportunity to pretty much an equal footing. Black unemployment before the COVID crisis was at 4.5%, something like that, a historic low, never been so low. In 2015, you had an individual, Freddie Gray, killed in Balmer. Again, that's Maryland speak for Baltimore. Baltimore. And he was a young black guy who was killed in the back of a police van. And there were riots in Baltimore. People tore up the streets. They torched black areas of the city. And people were saying, oh, this is systemic racism. Well, hold on, let me see. The mayor of Baltimore at the time was a black female. The chief of police was black. The prosecutor who prosecuted the case was black. The attorney general was an African American, and so was the president of the United States. So, excuse me, where is the systemic racism here? It's just absurd. So,
how do you feel Obama affected the race relations? Do you think he had any influence over?
Obama, remember his background. He is a community organizer. We don't know a lot about his background, but we do know that part because it was the one thing he wanted to tell us. He wouldn't tell us where he was born, at least, not in a way that people could believe. And he covered up his grades in school, and nobody could seem to find him at Columbia, who had been there at the same time with him. But we did know he was a community organizer. And what does a community organizer do? They find tension points, points of conflict, and they excite them. They rub them together like sticks to make a fire. So his job was to ignite fires, social fires. And he did that as president. Remember, there was a case with the college professor who was coming back to his house late one night in I think it was
Gates.
Harvard. Yeah, right. And the police stopped him because he was breaking into his own house. And he said, oh my God, he's raising my black. And Obama jumped in immediately.
Right into it.
And he jumped in many other times as well to ignite racial tensions rather than remind people that we are all Americans. We are part of one nation under God. We believe that all men were created equal. We believe that for the most part, that the Civil War created the defects of the first 80 years of our country, when the founders were unable to ban slavery in our founding documents, because otherwise they would not have had a revolution that held together against Britain, and we would still, we would be speaking the King's English today and paying taxes to London. So it is just mind-boggling to see the way people are standing America on its head. But there's a very good reason for this. It's very clear. Our colleges and universities and even our high schools and grade schools have been teaching that America is evil. America is the worst place in the world. We are fundamentally racist. We are fundamentally unfair. And this is what has been going into the minds of children for 2 generations. Yeah. So it's not a surprise that so many people actually believe this counter reality.
And they don't want to believe actual facts. I mean, if you present actual facts like there's only 16% of blacks in the entire United States, 70% is white. And of those 16%, 53% of all murders in the United States are committed by blacks. And 90% of blacks are killed by other blacks. So, why they say, well, there's more than 16%, in jails. We have 40% of people in jail are black. It should be 16%. but they never equate it to the 53%. It's always back to the 16%. And you start to talk, and then where is Black Lives Matter, right? When you have all these black deaths in the United States. What about the two policemen, Captain Dorn and Underwood out in Oakland? You know, it's not covered. And you present these kind of facts and they don't even want to hear it. They don't want to listen to you. They want to blacklist you and censor you and say, okay, it doesn't fit into their narrative.
Right. It does not fit into their narrative. In 2014, I was the lieutenant governor candidate in Maryland as a Republican with Charles Lawler, who was a conservative black Republican, U.S. Army intelligence officer. And we would walk the neighborhoods in the morning with black pastors of Baltimore. And when I say walk the neighborhood, we would go up these streets that would go on for miles, going up the hill, from the bay up, from the waterfront up into the western part, mile after mile of boarded up houses, mile after mile. Baltimore was a war zone, and it was a disgrace. This was 2014, before the Freddie Gray riots. It was an absolute disgrace. And how did we get there? Democrat mayors since 1908, Democrat governors since the 1970s, Democrat administrations, on and on and on, Democrat representatives in Congress. It was always the Democrats. They are the ones who basically created and enforced these horrid ghettos where there was no economic viability, there was no economic activity. In fact, the only stores that you would find open on these streets were pawn shops and payday check cashing places.
It sounds similar to Detroit.
Right, and that had to, tuck your hoodie before you come in, because they'd seen it. They'd seen it all. Disgrace.
And what do you think of the defund police initiative?
Well,
it'll backfire and be the end of the Democrat Party, I hope, or you think they're actually going to defund a lot of police departments?
I shouldn't make a joke of it, but I tell you, it's going to be great for the gun stores. If there's no police to protect your neighborhood, you better be protecting yourself. That's for sure. I think the Democrats are going to be a little bit embarrassed by this in the end. But it's going to take a while, and it's going to be horrible for the residents of those cities like Minneapolis.
Terrible. Seattle, Minneapolis. What do you how do you see the protests in France and Europe as how do you see the similarities and differences of those versus what's happening in the U.S.?
Now there I have to really laugh when I look at the protests in France or in Germany in particular, against racism. France in particular is one of the most racist countries in Europe. And just ask any Boer, any young North African kid who was born in the suburbs of Paris, how equally he is treated by the French system. Come on.
Yeah.
And everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. And I'm not saying that all of those young kids are, great upstanding citizens who believe in Republican France. Not at all. I'm just saying that there is a piece of their mentality which is justified. Their anger against the system, which is justified by the way that they've been treated. So the French and the Germans in particular just love to pile on when it comes to blaming America. And by the way, as they pile on in blaming America, Angela Merkel comes out and says, "Oh, President Trump, please don't withdraw American troops from Germany."
Right, of course not.
So it just kills me. It reminds me when I first came to France in the late 70s, and Jimmy Carter was president. By the way, Barack Obama is the only president who could make Jimmy Carter look good. But Jimmy Carter was president in the late 70s, and remember inflation was like 20%, and the dollar was going down in the toilet.
He dethroned Jimmy Carter.
He dethroned Jimmy Carter. So the dollar was like four francs to the dollar, and the French are saying, "Oh my God, this is terrible. Carter's destroying the dollar. We won't be able to export anymore." Flash forward about 6 years, and Ronald Reagan is president, is 1984 or so, and the dollar's at 10 francs to the dollar. And the French say, oh my God, the dollar is so strong. It's terrible. It's destroying our economy. We're paying too much for oil. So the French have
either way
one thing that's very consistent. Yeah, if they can blame America for their own problems,
they will.
They'll do it.
They will.
Okay, well, we're running short on time. We're at 40 minutes. Why don't we start wrapping it up? You want to ask the final question, Paul? Or I'd like to understand.
Yeah, I got it. Real quick, I wanted to get his, I'll ask them both together so maybe you can answer them together. The first one kind of changes the subject a bit because you have so many security contacts and so much experience in security. I did want you to say just a couple of words. What do you think is going on with all these ex-generals who are coming out completely anti-Trump? We have General Mattis, we have Kelly, we have who else? McAllister or McMaster. It seems like there's another one every day. And is it coordinated? Is it a coordinated attack? And then the other thing I just wanted to wrap up was, how do you see the election? You know,
that's that was my question.
Being reelected. Do you want to say anything about Biden and his campaign? And that's it.
Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
Where are you, Joe?
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Right. Joe Biden has proven the old adage that the Democrats, in certain parts of the electorate, the Democrats could elect a ham sandwich, as long as it had a D after its name.
Exactly right.
That's how he won the nomination. Right. Look, I think the generals who are getting deeply involved in politics are a disgrace. They are disgracing the honor that's been bestowed on them, the respect that's been bestowed on them by their service to the nation by becoming political. The military in the United States is by its very nature and statute apolitical. They obey the orders of the legally elected president. They obey the legal orders of the legally elected president. And what Mattis was complaining about, besides the fact that he was fired as Secretary of Defense and he never got over it, was that he projected that Donald Trump was going to deploy the military to shut down legal protests. And that's not true. That was never what the president said. Everybody knows that. Mattis knew that, but yet he projected a fall. He created a false, a false flag, and then he ran against it. Right? This is what the Democrats do. So I think this is something that really dishonors General Mattis and many of the others that have done so. They should stay apolitical, which is where the military is supposed to be.
Appreciate that. And Joe Biden and Trump's chances of being reelected?
Look, I think Donald Trump is going to win in a landslide in November.
Landslide,
like that. In a landslide, the media can't get over it. When you see this poll, as I mentioned at the beginning of our talk today, Black Americans, 40%, 41% pro-Trump. That is an unbeatable number for the Democrats.
I hope it's true. He only won 8% in 2016.
That's right.
But it was more than Romney's 2% in 2012.
Right. Correct. No. I think
41% blows my mind.
Well, it is, and you have people like Kanye West. You have Candace Owens.
15.
You have
Kanye West.
Right. You have all kinds of people who are well known in the Black community who are saying, "Hey, wait a second. Why do you have to assume that I'm a Democrat? I'm not a Democrat. I can use my mind. I can think for myself." Because that's really what it amounts to. The Democrats and the media have insulted Black Americans for generations.
Yep.
For generations.
And they're waking up to it. What are the chances of us winning the House by a landslide as well? And keeping the Senate?
That's a little bit more dicey. There are a number of House seats that the Democrats won with, in fact, most of them. They won the majority with seats that they won by 2,000 votes, 1,000 votes, 3,000 votes. So many of those districts are toss-ups, so it is possible. The Senate, we have a number of vulnerabilities this year, and I'm a little worried about the Senate. I've got my eye on it. I haven't, not sure yet about the Senate. It would be a disaster should we lose the Senate, because obviously it's the Senate that has been blocking this wretched agenda from the left-wing House Democrats.
Which leads us to need to remind all of our viewers how important it is to be out there and registering to vote as soon as today. Make sure you're registered, make sure you take the action to go vote, to go physically to an election poll, ballot, and submit your ballot. It's not about mail-in ballots. It's very important that you get the vote out. We get the votes out.
Well, when you're overseas, you got to vote absentee, but vote in your home state. And hopefully you're registered in those home states that make a difference, like Florida, like nowadays Wisconsin, like Pennsylvania, like North Carolina, like Arizona. These are important states for President Trump in November. And the Democrats
important battleground states. Well, okay. I'll just say thank you first and then let Antoinette wrap up. Everyone get election heist. Do you know when it's going to be officially released?
The election heist comes out on August 11. You can go to my website, kentimmerman.com, to learn about it. A lot of people endorsed it ahead of time, including Stephen Moore, one of the president's economic advisors, J. Christian Adams, who runs a voting rights group that I mentioned and looking into voter fraud. It's really important to get the pre-orders. And I got to tell you this just for 2 seconds. Amazon will not keep the book in stock if they don't see a large number of pre-orders before the book is released. I've had this with my last 2 books where the book went out of print the first day. And everybody said, oh, well, we're not going to pre-order. We're going to get it the first day it comes out. Everybody orders it the first day. The book goes out of print. Amazon doesn't reorder it for a week. Then it takes another 2 weeks. And then by then you're dead. 3-4 weeks later when they get more book. Please pre-order the book. Reserve the book for yourselves. Pre-order the book. That way, Amazon will order more, and it helps everything go along.
We're going to put a link at the bottom of the video on how to pre-order your book today. Get your own copy. We'll also be happy to promote it on all of our social media channels. It sounds like a really interesting thriller to keep you on on the edge of your seat, and I'll look forward to pre-ordering it myself.
Me too.
Thank you very much, Ken, for your time.
It's
a very valuable interview for us. We are sure that our watchers, our viewers, will be very interested in all that you have to say. Thanks to everyone for watching, and we wish you the best of success with your latest book. And you're welcome to join us anytime. Maybe after the election, we can, after the election, we can touch base.
Love to do another video. We'd love to do another video with you, Ken, whenever you're available.
Okay, we're great.
Thanks and good luck with your book.
God bless.